Greetings, and welcome to Beatles Stuffology. We're two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is McQuarrie, and I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing just fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm wondering when the last time was I saw a finger cymbal, which is something that Ringo apparently plays on today's song, Norwegian Wood.
Yeah, it's not the most common instrument in the world, but it is definitely one that you can hear quite prominently upon our song of the week.
Yeah.
Yeah, Norwegian Wood. Well, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we're edging our way through side A of Rubber Soul, which is a brilliant album full of fantastic songs that I seem absolutely determined to pick holes in. And but then I think you can do that as a fan. I think you can say this is really good, but actually, the rate at which they were writing and recording songs, even though they were taking it slower on this album, still means that some things appear that perhaps on reflection bands might have taken a bit more time over. And actually, it leads me to an old thought I've had. I can't remember if I've expressed it on this podcast before. That I wonder whether um, fans should be more accepting when singers decide they want to revisit a song and perhaps change the lyrics, or whether bands ever think, well, I would play that song a bit more often, but actually now I find the lyrics a bit kind of, and so I'm gonna update it. I'll give you an example. If REM were ever to reform, I wonder if they would choose to rewrite the lyrics, the crass lyrics to Ignore Land, and then maybe play it a bit more often.
I don't know. It's funny you should mention REM because I'm in the middle of reading the name of this band is REM, it's a new biography that's just come out. It's very good. I don't know. I mean, REM have frequently changed the lyrics of their songs, particularly the early stuff, just because either Michael Stipe forgot what he had originally sung, or because somebody in the audience yelled out something and it was better. So if there was any,
Or because they fall out with Jefferson Holt.
well, that's a good reason as well. Yes, that's a very specific example.
Yeah. So it's Norwegian Wood, and the reason for starting that conversation there is because Ian MacDonald, in his weighty tone, brings up the fact that he says that this is the first Beatles song where the lyrics are more important than the music, and I think in general he's right,
I don't.
um, in general. But I think there are some of those early songs where the power and the punch of the lyrics is just as important. But I do have a slight problem with it because I think that this song, for example, can be easily paired with Nowhere Man and filed in a drawer marked lyrics you thought that were cool and clever when you were a teenager and didn't know better. However, now they just seem pointlessly and willfully obscure. And in more ways than one, yes, I do have big drawers.
That's information I'm sure our dear listeners are very thrilled to receive. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if it's a completely valid claim about this being the first one where the lyrics are more important than the music. I think something like things you said today would qualify. I think it's a much more thoughtful lyric, and although the music is very very good, it's clearly taking second place to what McCartney is trying to express. So I'm not completely on board with that. I think it's an arguable case, but it's not one that I think necessarily stands up.
Although it is one of the first attempts at a narrative.
Well, yes, absolutely. And that I think is kind of I think that's one of the reasons that this song if you oh god, I was going to say carries the weight, but I really didn't mean
No,
that to be a
no, no,
Beatles
no, no,
pun.
no,
I'm
no.
sorry. Yeah, boo indeed. But I think that's one of the reasons that this song is invested with meaning in a lot of listeners' minds, particularly sort of long-term fans, because it is the first time they're starting to grapple with a kind of narrative construction to the song. Again, I don't think it's the only one. I don't think it's the first time they've ever done it because it's all these things are always iterative. It's always a continuing process. But it might be. I think it's certainly fair to say the fullest expression of it up till this point in their career.
It's also an attempt at writing not a genre, but in a particular style, whether that's conscious or subconscious. there is um, influence. There is the Dylan influence as well. So they have done writing to order before in terms of, oh, we need a title song for the album, oh, we need songs for the film, oh, we've got a record coming out in 3 weeks, let's have something. So they've written to order, but it all now seems like they're wearing the very contemporary influences on their sleeves, perhaps a little bit more. Um, and so that's fine. But also, I think there's an argument that says that it's one of the first times in which Lennon is trying to replicate some aspects of his I'm going to use inverted commas now, literary career as well. In a sense, he's trying for that cool, opaque vibe. He's trying to sort of suggest things rather than just merely hint at things. And I think there is a subtle, if slightly pretentious, difference between the two. He is asking us to read more into this rather than just perhaps some of those songs where it's a case of I'm expressing some of the emotions I felt inside. He's doing that, but also he is kind of saying, look at how clever I am.
I think so. And whilst I don't know, I always hesitate using the word literary around lyrics. Not in a disparaging way, but they're just kind of, I don't know. They're a different medium. They're not poetry. They're not literature. They're lyrics, and it's all right for those things to stand as is. I really appreciate the fact that Lennon is pushing his writing ability here. I don't know that he's ever been so consistently in charge of what he's trying to do lyrically. That's not to say that I think that this is 100% successful, though I think it's a very good effort. But it's he feels like he's fully in charge of it. You're right, that idea that he's leaning into kind of inverted commas literary aspects, that he's leaving things open to interpretation. It's not I did this, you did that, this is the conclusion. There is ambiguity in the lyric, and that's a really important development for Lennon as a songwriter. I mean, obviously, you talk about the Dylan influence, and we've mentioned that before when we were talking about You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. But You've Got to Hide Your Love Away doesn't really have any ambiguity around the lyric. I mean, if you're a great believer in the it's really about Brian Epstein, then I guess maybe. But putting that to one side, there's not a great deal of ambiguity in it. Whereas here we have a lyric which is inviting you to interpret it as a listener, and that's a huge step forward. Even if it is obviously clearly drawing on the Dylan influence and clearly drawing on his own sort of pretensions as a writer.
Donald does state that this lyric did end up in a book of modern verse. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I grumble and rumble about that.
In what way? In the fact that it shouldn't have done, or are you disputing Donald?
No, I mean, I'm sure he's right. I'm sure it has, but it's what I was just saying. It's lyrics are lyrics. They're not poetry. So it's not. It's fine to be able to write them down and read them, but ultimately that's not how they're meant to be read or interpreted. They're meant to be performed. So as soon as you take something which is performative and put it on the page, you're altering the nature of what it is that you're consuming and how you're consuming it. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure maybe it does deserve to be in a book of modern verse, but also lyrics aren't verse, lyrics aren't poetry. So I think it's flattering to deceive in many ways.
So leans into the mic for effect, so he can say this in hushed tones. How lighting blue touch paper and retiring here. How do you feel about lyricists maybe winning Nobel prizes and becoming Nobel laureates?
Well, I think it depends, but I mean, it depends what they win it for. If you win it for, I don't know, I like poetry. No, I don't think songs should win Nobel prizes for poetry because they're not poetry or literature. If there is a Nobel Prize for lyrics, then yeah, absolutely, of course. If that's how it chooses to be acknowledged, I'm not. It's not. I'm not virulently against it. I'm not offended by the very concept of it. So there's no blue touch paper to light here. But I think it's an important distinction. I think it matters that lyrics are there to be performed, not read. And I really I really do want to emphasize that because it's not the same as poetry. It's not the same as literature, and I think it devalues the quality of what a good lyric is to say, oh well, we'll just write it down and then it's poetry. No, it's not. It's its own separate kind of art form, and it deserves to be acknowledged as such.
You're neither going to be celebrating in 2026 the 10-year anniversary of Dylan winning the Nobel Prize in Literature, nor are you going to be nailing your thesis to the door of the Nobel Prize institution, Stockholm, I think, isn't it? Anyway,
Yeah,
you get the point. You get the point.
yeah. No preemptive nails have been ordered.
No, and it's funny. Oh God, I talk a lot about this kind of stuff down there. That lyrics aren't as important as the words aren't as important as the sounds that they make and the connection that they make with the music. And you might hear some interesting lyrics, but if they're up against music that's a pile of poo, then it doesn't really matter because it's the song that's important. And it's perfectly possible to enjoy a song lyrically, but actually only have heard half the words. Yeah, and
Pulls us back to murmur, right?
well, yeah, but I'm also sort of thinking of the fact that one of those bands that I loved in the 90s, Gene are going to be performing in October for the what is it, the 30th anniversary of Olympian. Also the 30th anniversary of the Bends coming out as well. So
Yeah.
oh man, I love 1995. And I really I've been listening to a lot of Gene recently, even before I sort of found out that was that they were doing that. And Martin Rossiter has written some really good lyrics, but also within the same songs, he's written some really cringy lyrics. But, there's balance. And, the needs of the song outweigh the needs of the individual line. Anyway, we're just getting even more tense. We're doing the thing that we're saying that, anyway, hi. Um, so, look, okay, I think it's worth pointing out that Norwegian Wood, Nowhere Man, and In My Life were all recorded around the 20th, 21st, 22nd of October. And I don't think I'm winning any prizes for analysis here in saying that only one of those is lyrically any good. Um, and I'll give you a hint: it's not Norwegian Wood and it's not Nowhere Man, despite what some people may think. There's something about In My Life that is which we will come to in a few months' time, is really fascinating, interesting, and honest. And even Lennon admitted, and I know Lennon can be inconsistent in his interviews and sometimes said one thing and then would say the other and had completely forgotten what he'd said in a previous interview. But even he admitted it was his first major piece of work lyrically. And the fact that he is saying that about that and not about this, I think is really important.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the way that this song has gone on to be kind of canonized is not necessarily, well, how can I say it? I suppose that it's one of those songs where there's a gulf between what the song is and how people react to it. Um, I'm trying to think of a nice way of saying that. Which isn't to say that the song is bad or not worthy of analysis or not worthy of consideration. It absolutely is. But I think it is one where its significance is maybe oversignified at this point, if I can say it that way. I think it's one where, because of the sitar, because Len is clearly pushing himself as a lyricist, because of the production, because of where it sits in the span of the Beatles' career, all those kind of things. I think it has become a bit oversignified, and that's not really to the benefit of the song, I don't think.
As you were talking, a clip from a very, very famous 1970s film popped into my head. It just seemed to be utterly important, in which Graham Chapman tells all of his followers, as a character called Brian, to F off, and which they reply, well, how shall we F off? It's like they're just hanging on every word, and just nothing's taken at face value. Everything must have this ulterior motive and meaning. And I think that's important, because especially because when you consider the song itself, we basically got man goes to woman's apartment. She asks him to sit. He sits on the floor. They drink wine. She goes to bed. He sleeps in the bath. And when he wakes up, she's gone to work. He lights a fire, apparently. Or is it metaphorical? I don't know. Loosely interpreted at burning all the bloody pine paneling in the apartment. And that's presumably because he didn't have sex with her. But there you go. But it's enigmatic, man, because she says sit, but there's no chair. What can it mean? Does it mean that he should sit on the bed that doesn't get mentioned, or or is he to sit on the rug? Ooh. Anyway, um, yeah, there we go. That's where we lose the remaining audience we have.
Maybe the chair is maybe it's a symbolic representation of the rigid conformity of society, and by choosing to by not sitting in a chair, by not having a chair that is even there to be sat on, the individual of the song is rejecting consumerism and worldly goods in order to live a freer lifestyle in the hippie sort of mode that we. Yeah, this is all bullshit. I know.
And is it related to the fact that I didn't have her, but she once had me? And are we talking about had as in fooled, or had in a more kind of sexual sense here? And so on. And man alive, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because actually, the words. Okay, right. So put cards on the table. The words do work. If you just listen to it without really listening to it, it's really good. If you listen to it to try and find some deeper meaning, then you end up pulling it all apart. And what was it? I think on Workers' Playtime, Billy Bragg wrote about how so if you pull, I'll find the lyric. Come back to me. You talk for a minute. I'm going to do some googling.
Okay, you go whilst I ramble on incoherently. That's always good podcast content. Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. I think ambiguity and deeper meaning aren't necessarily the same thing, and I think that's also sometimes the mistake that gets made with this song. I talked about ambiguity before, and the fact that the lyric is allowing itself to be open to interpretation, and that's fine. But I don't think there's a lot of deeper meaning in this. Even if you take so I lit a fire isn't a good Norwegian wood. Even if you take that line, and McQuarrie, who seems very keen to push the idea of burning the place down, for reasons I don't really know. But like even if you want to take that, okay, so there's an ambiguity there. It could be a fire in the sense that it's coal, presumably relating to Norwegian, or yeah, maybe this person just burned the place down. We don't know, but there's not really any greater meaning sort of brought out by one interpretation or the other. It's a reasonably ambiguous line. Although I must be honest, I'd listened to this song a lot of times before it occurred to me that it might not be literal, that it was a literal, like fire in the grate. It was only after I started reading books, or maybe even in like Q magazine or something, people go, "Oh no, he burns the place down." It's like it really never occurred to me when I was listening to it first out. But then maybe I was just an oblivious teenager. That's also
Do you
possible
feel as
too.
though it could be that the whole scenario has lit a metaphorical fire within him?
Oh, don't start that again. but yeah, if you want to take it that way, that's a perfectly legitimate interpretation. Absolutely.
I'm pretty sure that when I first heard it, I found the whole kind of oh, she says sit down, but there's no chair thing quite enigmatic. But then I was young and impressionable,
And a teenager,
And
presumably.
yeah, exactly. So the temptation to take the precious things we have apart to see how they work must be resisted, for they never fit together again.
Yeah,
Now that's a lyric I like. Must I
yeah.
paint you a picture,
That's
Billy?
such a glorious song, that.
Yeah, yeah. Can't sing for Toffee, but
Well, you
wonderful,
know.
wonderful song. Yeah, God love him. Anyway, right. Well, it's exactly what we're. I mean, are we doing it? Are we doing the lyrics, but also pulling apart the lyrics at the same time as criticizing those people that pull apart the lyrics?
Well, I don't think we have Well, maybe we have pulled them apart. I think we've approached them in a way that has allowed us to see how they can be analyzed rather than necessarily pulling them apart. Like I said, I think there is a difference between finding depth and finding ambiguity, and sometimes one leads to the other, and sometimes it doesn't. But I think what is inarguable is that there is again, like as we've talked about on quite a few episodes recently, another sense of progression, another sense of moving forward, and it is important to acknowledge that that is musical as well as
Although before we get
lyrical.
onto the music, I think we should acknowledge the fact that that Dylan's fourth time around, a song which I was not aware of, is is just as good a Mickey take of any Beatles song as anything that I've come across. Because actually, if you start to look at what Lennon's doing in terms of the rhyme, there's a really irregular rhyme scheme. There's no consistent rhyme scheme. There's some rhyme in some verses, not in others. In the first verse, you get that internal rhyme in the last line, which is then repeated in the final verse, and it's kind of inconsistent. And so at least he's not conforming to any of the traditional lyrical patterns, and that's fine. Well, what Dylan does is really interesting because he just takes the mickey about the content of the song, but also he layers in a much more kind of consistent rhyme scheme, as though he's effectively pre-writing an old Gallagher style, really kind of juvenile lyrics. And by emphasizing the rhyme in the way that he does, it just makes um, Lennon seem even more ridiculous. So, the fact that you'd have and felt with my thumbs, gallantly handed her my very last piece of gum. She threw me outside. I stood in the dirt where everyone walked. And when finding out I'd forgotten my shirt, I went back and knocked. And you kind of get a lot of that all the way through. And because also when Dylan's singing it, he tends to go up when he does he hits the rhyme. It really emphasizes that he's just taking the mickey so much. I think it's hilarious. Even to the point where he ends with, and I never took much. I never asked for your crutch. Now don't ask for mine. Now, again, this is going to sound really hypocritical after what we've just done, but in my mind, that's Dylan effectively saying, get off my turf, you silly little boy, because you're not as good as me. And, dear listener, Lennon is much better than Dylan at some things, but not at this.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly fair interpretation. And people don't give Bob Dylan enough credit for being funny. He can be a very, very funny songwriter.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, let's face it. The whole of his touring for the last 10 years has been one big joke, hasn't it? That seems to be what everyone says about. I mean, he's the
Pretty
epitome
much.
of Morecambe and Wise, and I am playing all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order.
Well, quite, quite. Well, I mean, if I don't have anything to add to what you said about Dylan, other than I agree. So, if we're talking about notes, then perhaps we should move on to the music a little bit because it's a it's an interesting. There you go. Listen, that's as close as to a segue as I'm going to get. Okay, so
It's good.
just live with it. Thank you. It's interesting musically because it falls into two very discrete categories. I would say you have the main structure of the song, and then you have basically all the sitar and everything on top of it. And the main structure of the song is really simple. The verses, the I once had a girl, she asked me to stay, blah blah blah. It's just three chords. It's just D, C, and G. And the main structure of the The next bit, which she told me she worked in the morning, is D minor and G. It's a very, very simple song musically, but of course, that's not what anybody remembers it for. What people remember it for is the sitar whacked on top. And I'm curious as to what your take on that is.
Well, I think we should go even further than that because this is so much. I mean, it feels really different because the pace of it is really different as well. We're not getting that rockier side or the bluesier side or the funkier elements. Um, it 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 just sort of stands out as being absolutely different in terms of the way it's presented overall. So, and that's fine because even things like "And I Love Her" and "If I Fell," that are more kind of ballady, still have a real kind of tempo to them.
Mm.
Here it does feel like it doesn't quite have the same pace, although he does still get through quite a lot in just a couple of minutes. I don't mind the sitar. I think it works. I would be fascinated to know how it would have sounded at the time, although I'm conscious of the fact that there were aspects of um, Indian culture that were starting to seep their way into British culture at the time. And also, I suppose, into that kind of Californian culture as well, because I think there's a suggestion that there were bands in California that were supposedly using this. Not that I have to say I particularly care about the who was first, who was second, who was third argument. Just as with the feedback, doesn't really matter. The case of does it work on this? And do we need to talk about it more widely in terms of a cultural context coming hot on the heels of Help and the interesting representation that exists in that film? So I think it works. I think if it shows that George Harrison is becoming more interested in other things and wants to bring it to bear here, okay, that's fine. At least it's offering something different and interesting and change because there is a sense, isn't there, when we talk about Within You Without You, a lot of the reaction to that, it talks of it as being a bit kind of dirge and atonal at times, and I can understand that, although I think people are wrong. Um, but here it is gloriously melodic, and that's got to be a positive.
For what it's worth, and mild spoilers for about 3 years ahead, but I love Within You Without You. I think it's an amazing song, and I think the sitar works really well here as well. It is adding texture and it is adding sounds that we have simply never heard on a Beatles album. Like you, I'm not particularly interested to know whether this is the first time it's ever appeared on an album or it's the first time anybody's ever had it. I mean, ultimately, I don't think there's much conversation to be had there, simply because, like, if the Beatles did it, then it's automatically the most important occurrence of it. Like, I'm sure maybe there was a Californian band who'd recorded with it for. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, this is the thing that people are going to be, likely exposed to first. So that's kind of the end of that conversation for me. I do think, however, that it works really well. And like you mentioned, the brevity of the song. The song is exactly the same length as P.S. I Love You. Which is, I don't know why I find that such a fascinating comparison, but we're only talking about what P.S. I Love You 62, so 3 years between the two songs, and yet there's so much going on in this song. And I mean, it's banal to the point of stupidity to say, oh, well, they changed so much in 3 years. Yeah, of course they bloody did. But it's fascinating just how much they can squeeze in to a song which is precisely the same length as P.S. I Love You. There's so much going on here. I'm not gonna drag over kind of like technical details of how difficult it was to record the sitar and all that kind of stuff. There are plenty of Beatles podcasts out there that do that. We are not one of them. But however difficult it was, like, the results are really worth it. And it immediately, we're on track 2 of the album, and it immediately shifts the tone of pretty much everything we've had up to now in terms of their ongoing career. This is something which is genuinely different, something we genuinely have not heard on a Beatles album. Yes, there is sitar in Help, and yes, there is sitar on the soundtrack to Help. But as far as like soundtrack album to Help, I should say. But this is something like there just hasn't been anything like this up till now, and that is really significant in and of itself.
It's interesting you said earlier it's a there's three chords effectively because it is insanely melodic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's also a really interesting point about this song because Lennon is often, I think I might have mentioned this before, but Lennon is often accused of being sort of, he writes horizontal melodies as opposed to vertical melodies. And a horizontal melody is one which is kind of like more or less on the same note. So if you think of something like Ticket to Ride, I think you're gonna be man, I think it's today, yeah. Like everything, and that's only one chord under that. So it's very kind of horizontal. There's not a lot of structure to it. But this is a much more vertical kind of song. It's going up and down, which is a more McCartney-esque kind of. McCartney is usually he's the more melodic one. He's the one who's more likely to produce songs which have a vertical melodic structure. This is as close as I get to music theory, so please enjoy it whilst it lasts. But yeah, Lennon is producing a really, really interesting melody here, even though the chords are pretty simple. And again, it makes a big difference to the kind of song. You said before that songs like Day Tripper and Ticket to Ride kind of slightly blend into one another in your mind. And I think that is
Yeah.
part of that kind of very horizontal kind of, because they don't, the melody isn't the lyrical melody isn't necessarily the strongest part of the song, but here it is, and that makes a huge difference to this song as well.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? And I think one of I know you don't want to mention the the other um well, so and so was maybe using a sitar or whatever, noted musicologist Jonathan Bellman thinks that See My Friends by the Kinks is the first Western
He knows
rock
fuck
song
all.
to integrate Indian raga sounds, saying it's released 4 months ahead of the Beatles' Norwegian Wood, blah, blah, blah. Well, I mean, the point about mentioning that is that, to me, that is a drone. That song has very limited melodical content, which is ironic, bearing in mind that Ray Davies at times is a master of that.
Mm.
And that feels more like a song where they had an idea and they got through the idea, recorded it, done, that's fine. Whereas this, it feels like bingo card moment. What will help the song? What is the thing that will work to make the song a better song? And George says, "How about this sitar? I'll just play you a bit." Go, "Oh yeah, we like that. That also adds something different. Good, we'll do it." So I think that's important that they were using instrumentation to elevate the melody rather than just because it's a cool thing to do, man.
Well, and I think the melody does sound much more interesting when it's played on a sitar than when it's played on a guitar. There's loads and loads of cover versions that replicate the sitar line in this, but just play it on a traditional guitar, and it's not bad. It's not a bad little lick, but it sounds so much more interesting and involving on the sitar. And I still can't quite decide if that's because I'm used to it. It's kind of like I don't know, some kind of old age bias where I've been listening to it for so long on sitar, or whether it's just like it just sounds much better. I mean, that's what it was really written for. So yeah, I don't know, but yeah, it sounds amazing and very very melodic.
So harmonies,
Yes,
good, aren't they?
yeah, pretty good. Yeah,
Okay, let's move on.
okay, lovely.
It is there's that sort of McCartney going for that sort of slightly strained higher harmony that I think is incredibly effective.
Mm. Yes, I love it. And I love the way it supports Lennon's voice as well. The two just
Yeah.
work incredibly effectively together. It's a lovely moment, and especially crawled off to sleep in the bath. It's just lovely the way that McCartney's just like underscoring and really kind of supporting Lennon's lead vocal, and I think it sounds incredible.
Yeah, and again, isn't that interesting that despite the fact that it's a bit of a nonsense lyric, the harmony works in service of the song.
Mm.
And so therefore I think hopefully most people when they're listening to it hear the harmony and work in conjunction with some nice sounding words. And because Bath is a great song. The word bath should be in more songs. You've got that lovely plosive at the start, and then it kind of tails off into something soft and warm and loving at the end. More songs should use the word bath.
Well, unless you pronounce it Bath.
Nope,
Okay.
nope, because it's not.
Okay, let's call the whole thing off. Okay, yeah, I mean, everybody is doing really great work in this song, and again, like we've sort of talked about the musical side of it, but everybody is really just at the top of their game here. Like Lennon's vocal is really well delivered, and yeah, incredibly well supported by McCartney's harmonies. Yeah, Ringo's doing some really great work here as well, and I'm never going to say no to a finger cymbal, which actually sounds dirtier than I meant it to. But it's just a really great thing. It's a really effectively put together piece. I mean, again, it seems so banal to praise the work of George Martin because we know how good it is and how incredible his work is here. But I mean, the way that this is all actually put together, all these disparate elements are put into a single piece that functions completely within itself is just astonishing. We don't really talk about George Martin much in this podcast, but there are times where his work has to be acknowledged. And yeah, I alluded to earlier, but given the difficulties they had recording something like a sitar, an instrument that nobody was used to recording, like the end results are like genuinely spectacular.
I'm sure everything you've just said for the last 2 minutes is wonderfully interesting, but the finger symbol reference again. I've just been googling finger bob
Okay,
and finger mouse because
they are
that's what I'm
glorious.
now thinking that finger symbol is just a little puppet character that Ringo was was using in the studio to try and entertain everyone else and keep them going. Um, yeah. Okay. Hi. Anyway, I'm back in the room now. What were we talking about?
Okay, good. Just how well constructed the song is.
Yes, I agree. Absolutely. Good. Right. Okay. Yeah. 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 Yes.
Well, before we transition away from talking about the sitar and Indian influences, we have had we've been flooded with an email. I'm pleased to report about help, and so I'm going to once again do a very professional sounding segue and talk about an email. If you're all right with that.
Sure.
Excellent. Lovely. So we've had an email from Lauren Malik. Thank you for emailing, Lauren. Lauren says, "Hey guys, somewhat long-time listener, somewhat first-time emailer. Okay. Thank you for the episodes that you put out. You remain an entertaining and fun spin on the usual overly serious or technical Beatles podcasts." That's a compliment, right?
That is both a wonderful compliment and also kind of fits in with the sort of damning with faint praise. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. No, I that has made my day. That's a genuinely wonderful statement. I apologise for laughing. Anyway, sorry. Carry on.
That's nice. She follows it up with a sentence: "It's nice to have a Beatles podcast that's just two blokes knocking about without being serious or precious about the subject matter." Well, I think we've relatively well proved that this episode, if nothing else. However, she continues, although now that I've said that, I have to disagree with your take on Help, the movie, unfortunately. I know it's not much of a common opinion, but I found the film, or movie, what's the difference, to be thoroughly entertaining. It goes without saying that it's not as good as A Hard Day's Night, but then, not many films are. Help still manages to entertain. Each Beatle gets a moment to really shine. I agree with Andrew very much on that point. If the film is a bit more stoned out than A Hard Day's Night, then that's just reflective of the state the band were in. A hint of documentary behind all that silliness on screen. Then there's the whole race issue with the movie. I must say it was refreshing to have a little nuance around the subject on your episode. You sure that was our episode?
Well, yeah, no, that doesn't sound like us, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And interesting to hear JG say that contextually for the time, it's not that bad. Mind Your Language was a decade or so later, and so much worse. I've always taken the race relations issue in this movie with a pinch of salt, since the rest of the movie is incredibly silly, so is the race stuff. Of course, it's not as modern or nuanced as one would expect from a modern film, but that doesn't derail the movie either. So there. This is a fun knockabout movie that is still easy to enjoy and can be fun if you're in the right state of mind for it. Keep up the good work, lad. Peace and love, Lauren. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for that.
Yep, no, that makes perfect sense. I can completely understand why, and lots of people still do view it in that respect as well. Yeah, yeah, and I suppose that also then doubles back to some of the things that I was trying to reiterate at the start. That even though sometimes we are picking holes in this, as well as expressing our appreciation, it is done from the position of love, and hopefully we also did say in that episode that it's still a cut above the many other bands who were producing movies at that time that were just awful beyond belief. But yeah, interesting. Thank you very much for your email. Please do write in again. That was yeah, really interesting. Thank you.
Yes, lovely. Yes, please do write in again. We would love to hear from you, as indeed we would love to hear from any and all of our listeners. But yeah, I mean, God, Mind Your Language. Mind Your Language is a funny one, you know. I was reading a few months ago. I was reading Phil Wang's autobiography, How to Be from Two Places at Once, and he's very forgiving of Mind Your Language on the grounds that it was just nice to see any kind of representation on screen, and I do wonder if that's also maybe something that help benefits from. Maybe it is stereotypical and cliche to modern eyes, but maybe the fact that there were any kind of people of Indian descent on screen at all was like a major achievement. I don't know. If you know, or if you are of Indian or the sub-Indian continent descent, then please let us know if that's actually a thing.
I've heard that being suggested about things like Love Thy Neighbour as well. Yeah, it was a case of I am being represented, even though it might look to now as though it's not a positive representation. I am being represented. So yeah, and as ever with these things, one person's view is their view. There are others. And I'm certainly not going to try and claim to have anything approaching the definitive view on representation of India and Indian culture, Indian people in the 60s, 70s, or 80s. What with me being a middle-aged white male.
And what with me falling into precisely the same category. Yeah, indeed. It's an interesting discussion about representation, and maybe not one for this specific episode, but yeah, very interesting.
Which specific episode are we saving it for then? I think it will come up on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah, that's true. We've already been going for 40 minutes. There's only so much we can squeeze into one episode, though.
But maybe we've also trailed it by talking about some of the reaction to Within You, Without You.
That's true.
For example, as well. There'll be something in it there. Right, so that sounds like you're wrapping up.
Well, a little bit, but we haven't really talked about cover versions this time out. Have you done much digging into the old cover versions?
Oh dear God, no. I mean, yes and no. And Leo Sayers was a real low
special
point.
moment.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I just find it's another one of those songs where people either try and do it earnestly and replicate what's there, or they try and slow it down to give it extra, air quotes, Lloyd Banks style meaning. Just for those outside of the UK, there's a very common trend these days to have it sort of slow it down and make songs even more acoustic to make them sound more serious, and then they appear in adverts for things like banks, hence the Lloyd Bank reference. but I all they end up doing is emphasizing just how much I like the original, even though a lot of this podcast makes it sound like I don't like the original, because I'm just reminded of how Lennon and McCartney approach this song. And I'm afraid if the cover version only makes me want to go back and listen to the original, then it ain't working for me. So I listened to a fair few over a range of years, and oh my god, they're tiring.
Yeah, a lot of them are not very good. And I guess maybe that's one of the things. And we were talking about the sort of relatively simple sort of chord structure and stuff like this that the song's put together with. But that's the thing; it's quite simple. So if you start stripping out the elements which make the song distinctive or unique, not necessarily leaving you with an awful lot. Like one of the ones that I think is quite interesting is the Corner Shop cover version. Not least because it's musically it's relatively authentic to the original, but the lyric is in Punjabi rather than in English, so it's kind of a bit of a reclamation project, and that's interesting. At least it's allowing you to see the song from a slightly different perspective or with a slightly different hat on. So that's certainly worthwhile. And I quite like Hank Williams's version of it as well. It's quite nice. This kind of storytelling suits country music quite well, I suppose. And I really like his version of it as well. It's not revelatory, but it sits quite nicely. But yeah, for the most part, most of them are pretty dud. Most of them are pretty
There are
dire.
some that you sort of think should be quite interesting. Tangerine Dream, for example. You think, oh, okay, well, I'm going to hear something a bit different here.
Yeah, but no.
No, you're not.
Well, Tangerine
PM
Dream version
Dawn.
is terrible.
I got quite excited about the fact there was a PM Dawn one, and then I listened to it, and I just thought this just does not sound anything like the kind of song that you would actually do. It's just all wrong. Um, and yeah, I just a really poor choice, which is a shame. Good song by an amazing band, and then a cover by a really decent band, and no, 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 too many rights making a massive wrong. No, that doesn't work. But you get the idea.
I see where you're going with this. Yeah. Did you listen to any of the like alternative takes or anything like that?
Yes, I did, which is unusual for me. And actually, there's one in particular on Anthology where the sitar is used much more um, as the center of the song that's kind of playing the melody throughout, which I liked. I thought it was pretty effective.
Yeah, it's a really nice cover, not cover version, a really nice alternative version. Either even, sorry, I'm losing track of being able to speak simple words in a sentence now. But yeah, it's a really good version, and it's just interesting to see these little side steps. It would take very little for that to have been, the definitive version. The lyric, I think, is fractionally different. I think there's a couple of lines that are the other way around or whatever. That doesn't meaningfully alter very much, but it's just interesting to hear that version and a slight sort of what could have been. But yeah, I really like that extra little sitar in it as well. That extra bit of melody. It gives the song a little something and kind of centers the musicality on the sitar rather than it being one flavor amongst all the others.
I still think they picked the superior version to put on the album.
I would agree. I would definitely agree with that.
And as we're in position of agreement, is it time to anything else you want to add? By the way,
No,
that
no,
was
I'm
me
all
doing.
good. I'm all good.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. So, scores on the doors for anyone who still cares and has got this far. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Have you got the spreadsheet open in front of you?
I do have the spreadsheet open in front of me. Yes.
What have I given a 7 to in the last 3 years?
You gave a 7 to Day Tripper. You've got to hide your love away.
Boom. There you go. Right. I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna say, despite the fact that I think the lyric is stupidly juvenile, and yeah, I'm gonna say it's up there with you gotta hide your love away. Yeah, definitely 7, man.
Okay, I'm just going to go fractionally higher. I'm going to go for 7.5. I mostly agree with you, but I think I'm slightly more forgiving of the lyric. But yeah, I'm going to go for 7.5.
I do think it is worth pointing out that it's actually quite hard to spend this period of time talking positively about something. Actually, it's so much easier to pick holes in it, and I think that's why we kind of do what we're doing with that sort of that loving bent. And if it sounds and if I appear to seem unkind, etc., etc., that's only me. It's not my mind. Blah blah blah. Carry on with your misquoting. So I'm just going to stop talking now. Over to you for the customary sign off.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, it is, of course, done from a place of love. We do this for a reason. Really sad if we come this far and we couldn't stand them. Anyway,
Jeez, yeah. How many years now? Oh dear.
Enough. Let's keep moving forward. Don't look back. There's no need to count. It's fine. It's good. We're all good. Right, lovely. Let's draw this episode to a close. You can really get a hold of us. Please do. You can contact us on email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We are on whatever is left of Twitter @Beatles_ology. Are we? We still are, right? Yeah. We probably shouldn't be, but we are. Yeah. Okay, good. And we are Beatles Stuffology on Instagram. And you can also find my blog at www.jgmcquarrie.scot. Please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcatcher you're using so that more people can find the show. It really does make a big difference. So if you've got a minute to just leave a little rating or a couple of sentences or whatever, we would very, very much appreciate it. And that's it for this episode. Next episode, we have You Won't See Me. But until then, keep listening.